I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome. It's December 5th, early afternoon here in Israel. And today I want to talk about something that's happening in the neighborhood, not specifically in Israel, and that is the goings-on in Syria. On the day that Israel and Lebanon and implicitly Hezbollah agreed to begin a ceasefire. That ceasefire is working, and that is a whole different question. We'll come to maybe in another conversation. Syrian rebels, led by a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, launched an offensive from northern Syria, pushing south. And in the course of the past week plus, they've taken the city of Aleppo, and they are driving, apparently at this point, surrounding on three sides the Syrian city of Hama. And this has been gaining quite a bit of attention, speculation, and the like. So let's try to break down who's who, what's what, and what's going on here. The rebels, commonly known in the U.S. as HTS, because Hayat Tahrir al-Shams is too much for most of the American commentators and talking heads, is a leading group, the leading group of the Syrian anti-Assad rebel movement. They are the new name of an organization that used to be known as al-Nusra, which was a break-off branch of al-Qaeda and affiliated with ISIS. And a few years ago, HTS decided to break that affiliation with al-Qaeda, and now have suddenly, at least to some people, become the good guys. HTS is backed explicitly by Turkey, while the Assad regime is backed and supported heavily by Russia and Iran. So let's take half a step back, a bit of a zoom, and begin by understanding that what we're looking at here is a branch of, or an expression of, a conflict that has been going on not for years, not for decades, but for centuries. And that is the imperial conflict between Russia, Persia, and Turkey. The imperial powers that are looking to the northern part of the eastern Mediterranean and into the Middle East. Keeping in mind that Turkey and Iran and certainly Russia are outsiders trying to control key parts of this incredibly important strategic region of the world. In this iteration of the conflict, and in any triadic conflict, this is often the case, two against one, in this case Russia and Iran against Turkey. And with the ceasefire that went into effect, as I said, HTS has launched this offensive, leading to, among other things, a great deal of conspiracy theory that now that Israel has a ceasefire, well, Hezbollah is making mischief in Syria. So let's break it down here again a little bit more. Israel is watching what's going on in Syria very carefully, very closely, and quite frankly has no real advantage in either side winning. The Assad regime, a decades-long enemy of Israel, Bashar al-Assad was once touted as the new, fresh, liberal, reformist leader of Syria. Turns out to be a murderous dictator in the mold of his father, and in some cases even worse than his father. Hafez al-Assad, who was a murderous dictator in his own right, and certainly no friend of Israel, allied, as I mentioned before, with Iran, supported by Russia, and a great supporter of Hezbollah. HTS, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, radical Sunni jihadis, also no great friends of Israel, although they make superficial noise at the moment that they have no interest in Israel. Anybody who believes that, well, you have no idea what's going on in the Middle East. These are jihadis who are not looking to make another immediate enemy, and Israel is not a good enemy to have, especially since Israel has, to a great extent, allowed this to happen through actions that have nothing to do with HTS, but nonetheless set up the situation. So here, let's say that Israeli actions have contributed to HTS's ability to launch this operation, not by intent, but by consequence. So let's see what that means. First of all, Hezbollah was a major player in the Syrian civil war, which is still going on, obviously, which has been dormant for a number of years now, a civil war that has left hundreds of thousands of Syrians dead. The numbers are estimated at between 300 and 500,000 dead. You'll note no UN intervention, no international court intervention, right, because Israel's not involved in that. Many millions displaced from their homes, but of course when it's done between radical Muslim jihadis and Syrians with some Persians on the side, that's not considered to be ethnic cleansing. To say nothing of the kidnappings and the rapes and the like and so on. But the civil war has been going on, it's been frustrating, and now it has burst out again, in part because of Israel's defeat of Hezbollah on the battlefield. Hezbollah, while rebuilding, and it's already in the process of rebuilding, has been severely weakened by the operations over the past year, but certainly over the past couple of months, particularly the ground operations, but also the elimination of its leadership, the breakdown of its communication systems, the destruction of a good deal of its weapons supplies, and the interdiction of further weapons being brought through Syria by Iran. So weak Hezbollah means that it cannot deploy as it did during the Syrian war phase 1, in part leading to the defeat of the rebels, again in those days called al-Nusra or al-Shams, and today HTS. Iran, which was very, very heavily entrenched and involved in at least supplying the Assad forces, but also in helping train them, help lead them, has also been beaten back somewhat and is not in a position to be overly supportive of the Assad regime, although they're doing the best they can. Iranian officers are already reportedly in the field helping to bolster Assad's forces in the Hama area. And Russia, of course, this had nothing to do with Israel, is kind of tied down in Ukraine. Was it? Yes, that battle that was going to be won in a month or two a couple of years ago. Apparently, the Russians aren't doing as well as they expected. And if they're using North Korean and Yemeni troops, they're probably a bit strapped for manpower these days. If they're using Iranian equipment like drones and missiles, their weapons production and supply is probably not all that great either. They're not in a superb position to be helping the Assad regime, although they're going to do the best they can. The Syrian army is performing its usual horrendous self. Typically, over the years, when the Syrian army launches a counteroffensive, what it basically means is handing over a whole bunch of tanks to the enemy. They've been doing it with Israel for decades. They've been doing it for over a decade in their civil war, and we saw evidence of that over the past week as well. Syrian tanks simply abandoned left on the roads for the rebels to pick up and turn around and use in the other direction. So that's what's going on up until now. The battle for Hama is on and being watched very carefully by everyone on all sides. The Turks are pushing it from their side. This is a chance for them to gain additional security along their border with Syria and to help flank against the Kurds, who they've been fighting with also for decades. And more interestingly enough, the Kurds are against the rebels because the rebels are being backed by Turkey. That doesn't mean they're necessarily in favor of anybody else, but they know that if HTS gains control of the area around the Kurdish areas, it's not going to be good for them either. And this is a bit confusing, it's okay, but there's a bottom line lesson in all of this. And that is that those who oppose the bad guy, and Assad is certainly the bad guy, are not necessarily the good guys. They are radical jihadi Islamists. So, where is it going, and what does it mean for Israel? In my opinion, we're going to see further advances, further successes on the part of the rebels, but ultimately they're going to come up against the hard nut to crack, which is the Syrian regime with its backing of Iran, with the Shiite militias that are already moving in from Iraq, with the Russians, and without the world really caring very much, massive strike retaliation. I believe that if Hama does fall to the rebels, and Hama has always been a hotbed of opposition to Assad, we're going to see massive bombardment of that city. Assad will be willing to take it back as rubble. He doesn't really care about taking it back intact. Ultimately, I think that these rebels will run out of gas, literally and figuratively, even with the Turkish support. And if not driven back, at least the line will be stabilized somewhere along the Hama line. Whatever area they control will become the equivalent of an ISIS-controlled area. We're already seeing evidence that they are taking women prisoner. We can see the sex slave markets opening again in the areas under their control. And despite all of their calls for, yes, we're just fighting for the Syrian people, everything's going to be fine. You may remember the Taliban said something very similar before the American withdrawal, and look what's happening in Afghanistan. From the Israeli perspective, a dilemma. And the dilemma is, who's worse? The murderous Alawite Syrian dictator named Bashar al-Assad, or a radical jihadi al-Qaeda type group? I'm going to say Assad is less bad, and I think that any person who deals with security in this part of the world from an Israeli perspective, if you had asked that person, myself included, 15, 20 years ago, would you see Assad as the least bad option? They would have, and actually rooting for him to hold, they would have laughed at you, rolled their eyes, and said, you have no idea what you're talking about. That's not the situation today at the end of 2024. In the short run, the very short run, it would certainly be to Israel's benefit for the Iran-Syria Hezbollah axis to take another beating. But in the long run, the destabilization and danger of an al-Qaeda type or an ISIS type regime to our northeast is far, far worse. So, rooting for the bad guy against the worst guy, and hoping in these kind of wars of one type of murderous dictator against another, simply for a high-scoring game and lots of extra innings. So on that note, thanks for joining us. Stay engaged, stay safe, be well.
Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, Please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.